we subconsciously correlate confidence and capability. If we
Yeah.
see somebody who presents as confident, we're more likely to think that they're good at what they do, and we're more likely to believe what they say. And the converse is also true. So if somebody appears to be quite doubtful, quite tentative in their posture, in their tone, and what they say, we at a subconscious level think, well, if they doubt themselves, then we should probably doubt them too.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of GOBO. I'm your host, Joe Espana, and this is the Antidote podcast that takes a second look at things that are often in plain sight. I've been mulling over something recently. How often are we as leaders our own worst enemy when it comes to confidence? It's been rattling around in my head for a bit, so I thought I would chat with my colleague Julie Smith, who wrote about it in her recent book, Coach Yourself Confident. I wanted to ask her why it is that we can undermine ourselves and what can we actually do about it. So let's get into it. So, hi Julie, it's great to see you.
Hi, Joe. Yeah, really good to be here.
I'm really super excited to dig into this subject. Been meaning to talk to you about it for quite a while. I know you've got your book coming out imminently. So we're going to be focusing on this question I've got in my mind, which is leadership confidence, why we are our own worst enemy. So are you up for it? Kick this around for a while.
Great question to kick around.
Well, maybe a good place to start would be to try and lay our table out in terms of the subject of confidence. So why don't we just put on the table what our definition of confidence is, first of all? What would you say it is?
Yeah, it's a great place to start. I think the thing that at first comes to mind is it's the idea of self trust. So it's the extent to which we trust ourselves to be okay with whatever work or life throws at us. And I choose those words quite carefully. So it's not this sort of sense that I can do anything, kind of a looking in the mirror in the morning and say, I'm a tiger, I can do anything. It's more that whatever happens, kind of challenging, not challenging, good or bad, I can come through it. I've got what I need to get through it and be okay.
It's a brilliant encapsulation of it. While you were saying this, I was thinking at my age, I definitely don't get up in the morning, look in the mirror and growl, thinking I'm a tiger, I'm a tiger. I was just wondering, from sort of the little reading I've have around the subject of self-confidence, I love this notion of trusting oneself,
Mm.
even in the case of a new situation, maybe I'm confident enough in a
Yes.
new situation while still having an element of, but I could improve, or there's something more to learn, etc. So I was wondering whether there was any connection here with the notion of self-esteem. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think they're intertwined, right? They must be, because I think, and certainly the way I think about confidence, the way I talk about it is kind of how my sense of myself, my view of myself, what I see myself to be capable of. So I think they are very much intertwined. I also want to pick up, you talked about kind of confident enough. I kind of broke down and circled the word enough because it feels so important to this whole territory. The idea that I am, I'm good enough. I know enough. I know need to strive for 100% knowledge on the topic to be confident enough to talk about it. I don't need to be somehow, 100% or perfect in a piece of work that I do. It needs to be good enough. It needs to be fit for purpose. And that's I can be confident with enough. So yeah, there's probably a whole podcast episode on the word enough, Joe.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, absolutely. Because I was just thinking, the context of all of this, that in terms of application situation, this kind of thing. I was just thinking, I was an individual contributor, and now all of a sudden I'm a first line manager.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to have probably two different types of people sometimes, where
Mhm.
you've got some people who are super confident, raring to go,
Yeah.
and it's actually the experience of being in that leadership role that then they have the realization, actually, I'm not as experienced or not
Yeah.
as fully rounded as a leader as I could be.
Mhm.
On the other hand, you could have people that are already entering that sort of leadership context in that classic Kubler-Ross situation where, oh my God, I've got the job. Now I'm so, oh my
Absolutely.
God, did I really want this job? Did I want this
Yes.
leadership position? And I'm now questioning my whole
Yeah.
ability. Why did they give it to me?
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. So I think,
Definitely.
in our experience, we've probably, well, so I've definitely experienced that in my own
Yeah.
career. I'm
Yeah.
sure that we've come across, leaders along the way at different
Yes.
levels where that may have shown up. I think the
Yeah.
thing about, let's talk a little bit more about self-confidence, but particularly in a leadership context,
Mhm. Mhm.
because I think, having self-confidence in the world generally
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
one thing, but I
Yeah.
think specifically in a leadership context, I was wondering whether your definition, I'm sure it still stands, but I'm wondering whether it can be built on. What,
Mhm.
what, what would you say to that?
Well, I guess where I immediately go with that is your point about stepping into leadership for the first time, and then we can maybe build from that. But I just think you really kind of hit upon something that is an invitation quite often for a lot of us for for self doubt. I remember vividly getting my first people management job. I think I had about 5 people in the team as I was about to join what was Walker's Crisps at the time. And I went into Waterstones in Nottingham and I bought a book called People Management for Dummies because I somehow thought that the answers were in this kind of yellowy, orangey covered
Yeah,
book, not in my own self, in my
yeah,
own head. And it was just, I know I'm not alone in that idea of, I guess it's feeling a bit like an imposter. It's feeling like, oh my God, I've got this job. What on earth were they thinking? And it seems to sort of go on from, actually, it was probably a good thing for me to recognize that there were things I didn't know because I was a beginner at leadership. This was new. But I think there's a difference between a sort of, oh my God, I'm lacking something and a panic fueled trip to Waterstones and just a recognition that I'm a beginner, so of course I'm going to learn how to do this. And I've got some of the core ingredients, like I can connect to people, I can be clear about expectations, whatever it is. I've got some of those core ingredients and I can build on that. So this idea of I'm good enough and I can be better is a sort of mantra I talk about in the book. And I think actually that's sort of powerful and it enables us to step into a new leadership role with a appropriate degree of confidence. I'm not kind of bluffing my way through and thinking, I'm going to be the best leader ever. Clearly I'm equipped for this. I was born for this. But just a sort of realistic, grounded sense of there's a reason why I'm here and I've got lots to learn. And both of those things can be true at the same time.
yeah, definitely. One of the factors you've mentioned a couple, and there's this idea of I'm an imposter, or I
Yeah.
shouldn't be here. Is really interesting because why it resonated for me is I'm imagining this happens for in many contexts to people. In my own case, what I my first leadership role was in an operational role in
Yes.
an airline. And of course, everybody that I was then leading, so I was leading, I was how old was I? I was 26.
Mhm.
And I'm leading now a group of 40 people that have been there like forever. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, I have nothing to contribute here, right? Totally misunderstanding the whole notion of
Yeah.
leadership. So definitely this thing of like I'm an imposter, I have no right to
Yes.
be in this role. Yeah, totally resonates with me. These are some of the factors that are at play, aren't there? So things like imposter syndrome, we could talk about that.
Yeah.
I think the other one that maybe I'll throw into the ring is fear or and maybe
Mhm.
fear of failing, sort
Yes.
of being shown to be an imposter. So I
Yes.
failed and everybody knows I'm failing.
Yes.
The other thing is maybe self-imposed standards of
Yes.
there's a notion of perfectionism.
Yeah.
Every decision has got to be the right one. Every interaction has got to be correct and
Yeah.
perfect, etc., etc. So I think that
Yeah.
all of those factors, and I'm sure you've got others, probably feed in. They're kind of like the grist to the machine of self-doubt, aren't they?
Yes. So you've picked up on a couple of I talk about confidence saboteurs, And you've picked up on a couple of them. So that fear of failure, but more than that, what you absolutely pinpointed was I fail and people see me
Yeah.
failing. Like that's the worst bit. And I talk about this thing called FOPO, which is fear of other people's opinions.
Oh, right.
Because
Brilliant.
that's
So
you know,
you've changed FOMO around.
I
Yeah.
have, see what I've done there. And I think that's really strong. So I see it in myself, I see it in coaching clients that it's not only that, something doesn't go as I'd hoped, it's how people might view me as a result of that, that is really scary for many of us. So can lead us to hold back, actually. And I think the other one that you talked about, definitely another big confidence saboteur, is perfectionism, because it's just so bloody unreasonable, right?
It
This
stops you.
expectation of ourselves. Well, it either stops us, as in we just think, it's often an underpinning for procrastination, isn't it? It's like, well, it's got
Totally.
to be brilliant, so I won't start. Or it's exhausting
Yeah.
because we try and reach it and we try and reach it and we try and reach it, possibly even though a rational part of ourselves knows that it's impossible, it's a unattainable bar. We can't let ourselves off the hook. We still somehow feel like we should strive for it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's really interesting because as you were thinking, there's sort of other offshoots that almost like the other side of confidence where people are very confident. You see
Yeah.
this in, well, in fact, my son actually, when he first started to drive, sort of, I've only just had 3 lessons. I'm the best driver in the world. Okay, I'm heading for the crash. Do you know what I mean? So I'm
Yeah.
exaggerating, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean.
Mhm.
Question in my mind here in terms of they're factors. These are the things we feel. I think
Mhm.
there's an issue here that you've raised around mindset,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
maybe I've forgotten her name, but the book Growth Mindset.
Yes,
And
yes, Carol
not
Dweck.
yeah. Thank you, Dweck.
Yeah.
Um, this notion of where does this fear of failure come from? I
Yeah.
think it's partly social and educational that
Yes.
we have to, if we haven't reached certain attainments then we've failed, and yet
Mm.
as Dweck says, it's the activity of attempting something and failing and learning from it which gives
Yeah.
you a different, and people do have different mindsets and attitudes to this. So my question really in my mind is this notion of, and I don't know the answer, is is self-doubt or the level of self-confidence that an individual
Mm.
might have, could that be driven by my personality type or my style, the way I am, I'm made up.
Yeah. I mean, it's a massive question, isn't it? And it's a really fascinating one. What shapes our confidence, or the presence or lack of confidence? And it seems to me that there must be a connection between our personality type, our upbringing, and some of the beliefs that were formed through our upbringing, the wider culture. So, I mean, I'd love to dig into the research about confidence levels in different nations, because I
Yeah.
think that would be really interesting. It feels like intuitively there must be something in that. There's the whole question about gender and about the sort of social constructs, the social expectations of women in particular, and how that impacts confidence for women. It's a fascinating topic, and there's so much more that I could
Oh,
go and
Julie,
research.
you're talking my language. You raised something there which I think is really, really interesting, which fits into this part of our conversation around personality types.
Mm.
I'm assuming you've read Amy Cuddy and her research around presence, and
Yes.
she took the fake it till you make it
Mm.
another step towards fake it till you are it, you become it kind of thing. But actually, your point about our social context and our personality and how we were brought up has to be at play, because back end of last year, I was coaching somebody, a senior leader, had very successful career,
Mhm.
massive self-doubter. And one
Right.
of the things that emerged was total evidence throughout her career of
Yes.
having succeeded and done
Yes.
well in managing, in the leadership role, managing others, leading others. So loads of evidence, and yet this sort of nagging little voice in her head. And of course, she happened to be female.
Yes.
And Amy Cuddy says there is quite a lot of evidence that says, and it may be socially
Mhm.
impacted, that on the confidence stakes,
Mm.
men tend to present themselves as more
Yeah.
confident than women,
Yeah.
even physiologically, the
Yes.
space they take up,
Yeah.
how they walk into a room, this kind of thing. And
Yes.
then, of course, connected to this thing of, you said, the fear of what others might think of
Yeah.
us. Cuddy does say something about how we think other people view us affects how we present ourselves. Not only does our mindset affect our physiology,
Mhm.
but actually our physiology affects our mindset. If you're big and stand
Yeah.
up straight and sort of take up a lot of space and are maybe loud, that sort of boosts your own feelings about yourself.
Yeah.
And likewise, if you're all sort of curled up, last person to speak in a meeting, other people think, oh, well, they're not very confident in their
Yes.
space, kind of thing. So
Y
that, I think, it plays into our sort of discussion about
yeah.
personality and, whether I'm, as I said, with this client I was coaching, this
Yeah.
whole nagging self-criticism. I think
Yeah.
self-criticism has got to be part of or a factor, driving factor of self-confidence.
Definitely. It's that diminishing voice, isn't it? I guess it's the inner critic that if we've got an extremely alert inner critic who kind of gets very agitated at the mere prospect of making a mistake or saying something that someone else might disagree with, making ourselves kind of visible and therefore vulnerable to judgment from others, I think that's a huge part of it. I think there's so much in what you said there. And if I just pick up on one of the last things, I think you alluded to the truth, and research would back it up, that we subconsciously correlate confidence and capability. So if we
Yeah.
see somebody who presents as confident, we're more likely to think that they're good at what they do, and we're more likely to believe what they say. And the converse is also true. So if somebody appears to be quite doubtful, quite tentative in their posture, in their tone, and what they say, we at a subconscious level think, well, if they doubt themselves, then we should probably doubt them too.
Yeah, I totally 100% agree with that, the way you've described it. And I think we've seen it, just picking up on a previous comment, we see it in our own work experience, difficult conversations. So as a leader, I'm going to have a difficult performance review or providing some really strong developmental feedback to
Mhm,
somebody.
mhm.
And I think feedback is a good example because I'm sure you'll have lots of views on this, where the leader is like there's 101 questions going on their mind even before they've opened their mouth to say, do you know what, this isn't actually working very well for us. We need to
Yeah.
sort of think about how we can support you, because they're worried about how the feedback's going to land. So
Yes.
therefore, like, oh, I can't provide feedback, so therefore I'm not a very good leader. So therefore, and it's sort of like it's almost like
Mm,
a snowball that gets bigger and bigger in
definitely.
our own heads.
I think that shows up in so many ways. I mean, what came to mind was eh, ahead of a difficult, in inverted commas, conversation. So maybe it is this, sort of tough, very useful developmental feedback that somebody wants to give. I think one of the traps that we can fall into if we're nervous about that, if we lack confidence on our ability to have that conversation, is to over prepare. And I know I can think back to me doing it. So I over prepare and I end up with what is effectively a script that I just then kind of blurt out, and I'm reciting it probably quite fast and just sort of almost throwing it at the other person, which is actually, ironically, it's diminishing the possibility of it landing well. I'm,
Yeah.
responding to my own nerves by learning something and reciting it. And of course, what I'm missing there is the much stronger impact of having an actual dialogue with the person and really seeing in the moment what's landing, what's not, where are they at, what sense are they making. So I think that's a real example of where my own
Definitely.
nervousness gets in the way.
Definitely. There's two things that emerge for me from what you've just said. The first is, if in this context of self-confidence and particularly in the leadership context, so leadership confidence, the example you've just described for some people, particularly where they're a bit of a self-doubter, it
Mhm.
kind of is fuel to the fire, isn't it? Because it's more evidence of how rubbish I am. So,
Yeah,
so it kind of like, there you go, another bit of evidence that I'm really not in the right job, kind of thing.
yeah,
And so it perpetuates the idea. But the
yeah.
other thing that struck me is, that difficult moment of the conversation and how my perception of how
Mm.
other people might respond and everything, and my self-doubt, it drives the cortisol, which is the stress hormone.
Mhm, mhm.
And again, Amy Cuddy, funnily enough, talks a lot about this. In self confidence, you kind of need two of the hormones operating at the same time. You need the testosterone because it's the dominance hormone, which gives you that sense of I can have
Right.
this conversation, etc. And you need a little bit of the of cortisol, the stress hormone, so that your senses are all at their peak and you're going to handle it well. But of course, too much of either can
Mm.
absolutely destroy that leadership moment as well. You can
Yes.
be totally overconfident. Your testosterone's pumping through you, the arrogance starts showing through,
Yeah.
and you're not actually leading in a
Yeah,
compassionate or an appropriate way for the individual.
yeah,
Likewise, your stress levels are through the roof, and you can ruin the conversation as
yeah.
well, not being able to articulate anything well
Mm.
enough.
And it seems to me that either of those too much, so whichever way round it is, it it takes us out of real connection with the person in
Mm.
front of us, and that's what really disrupts the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we've got a handle on what self-confidence is, our definition of it, and in the leadership context and how it might show up and some of the
Mm.
factors.
Mhm.
What on earth are we going to do about it, given that we've said we're probably the first person to shoot ourselves in the foot when it comes
Yeah,
to leadership confidence? So let's talk a little bit about suggestions, tips, recommendations we might give people listening
yeah.
to this episode about how could you not be your worst enemy when it comes
Mm.
to self-confidence. What's your take on that?
I think the first thing that comes back is one of my favorite quotes in the sort of development sphere, which is awareness is curative, which comes from Tim Galway. And
Yeah,
so I think it's helpful to just know that I am my own worst enemy sometimes,
yeah,
because perhaps that enables me to catch myself when I'm doing it, when I'm kind of getting in my own way, when I'm criticizing myself really harshly, and just perhaps sometimes it's enough to just go, oh, okay, maybe it's not entirely true what I'm telling myself.
yeah,
Um, and then I think taking that a bit further, one of the things that we can do is try and really consciously separate out fact from fiction. So what what is observably true? What did someone actually say? What actually happened? And what's the story that we're layering on top of that in our own minds, which is probably full of kind of self-judgment and criticism.
totally. Yeah,
We might be, I might be sitting here thinking, yeah, I'm watching Joe. I can see him on the screen. He thinks that I am rambling on. Oh my goodness, he's wondering why on earth he invited me on this podcast. So I'm not thinking that, but it's an
yeah,
example of the mind reading that I suddenly think I have this ability to read
yeah,
minds, and it's really diminishing. So, yeah, actively separating out fact from fiction. Sometimes I suggest to clients that they write it down. For example, if I'm going into a high stakes meeting and I notice a high degree of self doubt, maybe write down what is going through my mind. So, I'm going to forget my key points, or I'm going to mess it up. They're going to think I'm an idiot, whatever it is. And then try and capture alongside it what's actually true. So maybe I might write down, I've spent 8 hours on this topic. I've spent more time than anybody else in the room. I'm more familiar with this topic than anybody else in the room. I might write down, somebody might ask me a question I don't know the answer to, and that's okay. I can say, I'll come back to you. Or I might write down, somebody might have a different point of view, someone might disagree, and that doesn't automatically mean that I am wrong. So it's just this idea of really spotlighting the fact that sometimes we tell ourselves things that are just rubbish, just entirely untrue.
totally. The two things that come to mind, sort of in our technical world of coaching is around transactional analysis and the stories we tell ourselves, and the other one is around cognitive behavioral therapy, where we talk about, okay, where's the evidence? So you
Yes.
think you were rubbish in that presentation.
Yeah.
Where's the evidence? And what evidence do you have that you were great on another occasion?
Yes.
So there's a reaffirming kind of thing, looking for evidence. The other
Yes.
thing that you've mentioned, which I think leads us down the how I view me kind of route,
Mm.
is where how true is this self-perception, of that
Mm.
situation. How true is it that you were rubbish? And it does get you into the realms of beliefs, and
Mhm.
I always kind of go, there's two types, aren't there? There's the rational beliefs, and
Mhm.
in layman's terms, they're rational because I can prove it.
Yes.
There is evidence to say that it's true, kind of thing. It happens. And there is the irrational beliefs. And the way again, layman's terms, the way I describe it is irrational beliefs can be very strong.
Mhm.
They're irrational because I can't prove it, but I still believe it. And of
Yes.
course, that kind of doesn't help. So, from a coaching point of view, whether you have a coach or you're almost coaching yourself, this
Mm.
notion of really paying attention and raising your own self awareness
Yes.
is part of the story, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
challenging your own thinking, challenging your
Yes.
own belief. Is that true?
And I think that links back to the reference you made earlier to Carol Dweck and fixed and growth mindset. So the fixed mindset would be, I just am rubbish. This is not my thing. I'm rubbish at presenting. The growth mindset is, okay, I've got plenty of room to improve and I can. I can do some things differently. I can experiment. I can find those small things, those steps to take, as you say. And with practice, I will get better. And I think this is just this sort of broad truth that with practice, we can get better at anything. It doesn't mean
Yeah,
we can be the best at it, but we can get better at anything.
yeah, definitely. The something that's come up in my coaching practice over the years is when an individual, despite the sort of exploration, they still can't find or think of an option or think of an answer.
Mhm.
And it affects their self-confidence in a way because they can't think of an answer.
Yes.
Maybe there's something about looking wider and saying, could I learn from other people who are pretty good
Yeah.
at this thing? Are there mentors out there that I could speak to? Just to sort of get that feeling of I could if I tried, rather than no, I'm
Yes.
never going to be able to do this.
I think it's lovely, and I think what you point to is the idea of learning from others, and also kind of picking up a sense of possibility. So if that person can do it, so can I. I can learn to do it. So I think there's something really encouraging in what you described. The important thing, obviously, is that that's different from looking at someone else and comparing them to
Yeah,
myself in a way that's diminishing. So that's sort of comparisonitis where
I
I
love
look
that.
at all of the ways that they are better than me. And I look at all of the reasons why I could never
Yeah,
be good as
attain that
they are.
standard.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
it's kind of, I think there's a really important frame on that about how do we learn from others and use that as a way to fuel our belief that it is possible and find the steps to improve versus holding other people up almost as more evidence for how rubbish we are, that we
yeah,
can never be like them.
yeah. I think there's a one other thing. This notion of patting yourself on the back, I think, is really important to building your self confidence. I was just thinking about that classic sort of way of looking at changing behavior or habit. So the first steps is kind of like, can you have you got what it takes, the sort of capability bandwidth to be able to.
Yes.
The other one, I suppose, is do you want to the motivation side of things. The fourth is opportunity,
Mhm,
your
mhm.
context. I'm never going to be a brain surgeon because I'm never getting to a surgery and start playing around with the brain. So you need
Yeah.
the opportunity as well. But I think the fourth factor, which psychologists talk a lot about, is psychological reward. And I think in a confidence
Mm,
perspective, is that what I might call the pat on the back. So you
yeah.
had a go, it wasn't perfect, but you moved forward.
Yes.
So moving forward needs self-rewarding
Yes.
kind of thing.
I think you've hit on something really important because I think some of what is missing when I think of clients who are kind of battling with their confidence, who have quite a lot of self-doubt is that they don't give themselves any psychological reward. So they sort of discount their
Oh, it was
achievement.
nothing.
It
Yeah,
was
yeah,
nothing. Yeah, or they just don't own it. I mean, it's
yeah,
a bit like your client that you referenced a little while ago in the conversation, who there was loads of evidence in her career that she had achieved a lot, but she perhaps couldn't see it. So I think there's
yeah.
something really important what you say, that the patting ourselves on the back, not in a kind of false way, aren't we brilliant, but in a really seeing achievements, small and big, really seeing and owning, even if it is, as you said, a step forward. Step forward is brilliant. That's the forward momentum that we want. And it's helpful to really acknowledge that to ourselves as a way to fuel the next step forward.
I totally agree. In fact, in my own career, self-doubt has been a massive drive to making steps forwards because I'm
Yeah.
thinking, I know nothing about this. I better get clued up, or I know nothing.
Yeah.
I better over the years, it's incremental little steps. I do think this notion of patting yourself on the back is, I think you often see it in the world of where you want to change a habit,
Mhm.
so there's those loads of books on changing habits from less than positive habits to habits that you want to have in your life. But I think they're all unanimous that this self psychological reward,
Yeah.
what that does is well, it does lots of things, but one of the things it does, it prompts having another go. And the
Yes.
having the another go at the thing that you had sort of lower levels of confidence about and practicing.
Yeah.
So I think for me, leadership
Yes.
confidence is something that probably doesn't start completely at the beginning of the sausage factory or career as a leader, but maybe is an outcome eventually because you've had to
Mm.
go along the way and sort of said, I'm learning.
Yes. And you've recognized that. You've seen the progress that you're making. So
Yeah.
there's a sort of idea. And it makes me think of the idea of kind of keeping up with yourself, because there were a couple of people I spoke to for the book, and they both told stories that were really similar. They One of them is the HRVP globally for a really big, well-known organization. And she talked about, occasionally just kind of thinking, still feeling like the graduate trainee that she was 26
Really?
years
Wow.
ago. And it's almost like, they're fairly momentary. She doesn't spend a lot of time there. But I think it's this idea of actually keeping up with ourselves and really feeling that we've amassed an enormous amount of experience and
Yeah.
we've grown enormously over a period of time. That's really important to maintaining our confidence. It's this whole, I talk a lot about kind of keeping confidence in line with capability. And it's trying to make sure that they don't become adrift from each other.
Yeah.
Overconfidence that we alluded to earlier, or I guess that I see more often, underconfidence, where I'm not seeing how brilliant other people see me. I'm not seeing my own brilliance, my own capability.
Yeah.
And almost what we're talking about here is building confidence, is almost building a habit, to use your phrase, of seeing myself as I really am.
Yeah. Definitely. And it being incremental over time, which
Yeah.
builds your confidence over time.
Yeah.
I must get my priorities straight. My priority number one is a massive thank you to you for joining me and sort of just kicking this subject around. A massive thank you for joining me today and talking about, I hope, something that will resonate with our listeners and that we've given them a couple of tips as to what they could actually do about it. And of course, they can always buy your book and read a lot more detail about it. So thanks ever so much, Julie.
Thank you, Joe. Really appreciate the invitation, and it's been a fascinating conversation. So hopefully, yeah, something useful in there for your listeners as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, that's it for today's chat. And if we've boosted your confidence just a little bit more as a leader, then we've done our job. My thanks to Julie. You can grab a copy of Julie's best-selling book, Coach Yourself Confident, on Amazon. It's full of really practical ideas and tools. If this episode struck a chord with you, hit subscribe and leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially if you've battled with the old imposter syndrome too. And don't forget to share this episode with someone who might need a little leadership pep talk. We all do from time to time. Until next time, bye for now.